Upon leaving the demon, I was disoriented and could only tell I was in an immense, spacious building. Strangely, to my surprise, and despite my terror, confusion, and fear, I felt better than I had for years. Before my death, I had suffered terribly, but I noticed quickly I was now in perfect health. I stared at my hands. My wedding ring was gone. The scars and age spots had disappeared, leaving only the scattered freckles from my sunny youth. I touched my front teeth, surprised that those lost so long ago in a head-on collision with a drunk driver had been replaced, and the once jagged row of my staggering bottom teeth was straight. I suppose I was also surprised I had a body at all. As a Mormon, I believed I would eventually get a perfect body after the resurrection, but immediately after my death, I was supposed to go to a spirit world. It was clear this was not what happened. Feeling lost and confused, I was overwhelmed with the desire to pray, as I had so often during my mortal earth life. While alive, I often knelt in prayer and asked for blessings and sought direction from the Lord. As then, I dropped to my knees and began to pray, but I was overwhelmed with doubt and fear. Could I pray my way out of hell? Who was I praying to now? The God I believed in was a kind, wise, heavenly Father, who loved me and sent his Son to redeem me. He had an eternal plan, which would end in my deification if I lived according to the commandments and obtained the proper ordinances here in this life. I was supposed to go to a spirit world to share the gospel with other dead spirits until the resurrection. I would then go to the celestial kingdom and live with my wife forever, becoming a god like my heavenly Father and continuing his work of redeeming the uncreated intelligences that filled the universe. This hell did not fit anywhere in my belief system. I began to cry. I bawled like a baby, tears falling onto the white smock. I prayed, but all the while I was shrouded in blind confusion. I knew nothing about Zoroastrianism. I missed my wife and children. I missed the familiar trappings of my home, my work, and my routines. Questions plagued me. Was I supposed to pray? The demon said God was called Ahura Mazda. Was he kind and loving? What was his nature? Was it even a he, like the God I'd worshipped all my life as a Mormon? Could it be a goddess? I had no way to know. How do you pray if you don't know what God is like? Maybe God was a demon. That would explain much of the misery of earth life. Would prayer do any good? I could not tell. Suddenly, no more than a few minutes after I had arrived, or so it felt to me, the lights went out, and in the dark I wept until I slept. At 6 a.m., I knew it was 6 o'clock because there was a large, almost 2 meters in diameter, round clock near me on the wall, like a giant version of the kind that hung above my elementary school teacher's desk, and underneath it was a digital readout that said, Year 000000, Day 2. The lights came on as quickly as they had gone out the night before. I surveyed my surroundings carefully for the first time. I was in a long corridor, about 12 feet wide. Running along the side of the hall was a thick metal pipe-like railing about 4 feet high, intended, no doubt, to keep me from falling into a fearsome chasm. The railing was painted a soft brownish red and fashioned with rounded corners and turns, like the low fences that front the wire cages at the zoo. It extended down the endless hall until it disappeared in a vanishing point, almost as if I were looking into parallel-facing mirrors that give the illusion they go on and on forever. Looking across the railing to the other side of the chasm, which seemed as bottomless as the corridor seemed long, I could see I was on an upper floor of a vast building. The floors on the other side of the chasm looked like a series of matching floors to the one on which I stood. The floors across the 100-foot span extended upward and downward as far as the eye could see. On every floor were rows upon rows of books. Millions of them. You will see soon what a terrible underestimate this is. It struck me as nothing so much as a prison block, with books arranged on shelves on each floor rather than jail cells. The floor was carpeted with the drab, gray, highly functional carpet that seems ubiquitous in public buildings. People were scattered everywhere, on both sides of the abyss. Some standing, staring blankly, others walking in a daze. some weeping uncontrollably, some kneeling in desperate prayer, as I had done last night. Everyone looked as stunned and frightened as I felt. No one looked interested in talking, and everyone seemed as preoccupied as I was with trying to understand this strange afterlife into which we had unexpectedly been tossed. I turned back to investigate my surroundings. In the vicinity of where I slept, I found a break in the shelves of books. Looking over the rail to the other side, where I had a panoramic view of this strange building, I could see that such breaks in the rows of books occurred about every 300 yards or so on each floor. The breaks were identical. On each one there was a round clock with large black hands and a digital date readout in the center of the clock face. In front of every clock, in the hallway, was a small kiosk near the railing. Next to the clock was a sign with a set of rules and advice. There was also an open entrance into a small room. I peered into the closest and found it led to a small chamber furnished with 7 neatly made beds, the frame being constructed of the same metal that fashioned the railing. On each bed was a mattress, fitted sheets, pillow, a blanket, and a smock identical to the one I was wearing. There was also a drinking fountain near the entrance. Attached to the little bedroom was a spacious bathroom with a shower, sink, and a generous full-length mirror on the wall opposite the sink. There were no necessities like toothbrushes or razors of any kind. However, there was toilet paper, tissue, and soap in a pump bottle. Somehow I had always assumed that going to the bathroom was something of such an earthly nature that it would be unnecessary in the afterlife. There were to be many surprises. I looked in the mirror and discovered not the gaunt, 45-year-old dying of cancer me that stared back at me from the glass the last time I looked at my reflection, but a fit version of my 25-year-old self. My body was sleek and well muscled, with my hair neatly cut and parted down the middle, as I'd always worn it. My teeth were white and straighter than I'd imagined possible. For a brief second, I had a light-hearted feeling of satisfaction. I had been resurrected, as I'd always believed in my religion. I flexed my muscles and stood, admiring my flawless grin, greatly pleased by how healthy I felt. Thinking that my resurrected body would be indestructible, as my Mormon beliefs held, I tried to scratch myself. I was disappointed that without difficulty I drew blood, and it hurt. This was not the type of afterlife I had always envisioned, not by a long shot. A man came into the bathroom and saw me preening before my newly fit reflection. He turned around with a quick, "Sorry," and left me alone to my marveling. I went back to the corridor to look at the sign placed next to the clock. The letters were large and black, printed on a reflective background, like the surface of a speed limit sign. This is what it said: Welcome to Hell. This hell is based upon a short story by Jorge Luis Borges from your world called The Library of Babel. Here you will find all the books that can possibly be written. When you are ready to leave, find the book describing your earthly life story, without errors, example, in spelling, grammar, etc., and submit the story through the slot below this sign. If the story is accepted, you will be admitted into a glorious heaven, filled with wonders and joys beyond your imagination. During your stay, you may be interested in reading a book on Zoroastrianism. By special arrangement, there is one on every floor. The other books are randomized. The food kiosk will provide whatever you would like to eat. Just ask for it. We would ask that you please follow a few simple rules during your stay in hell. 1. Please be kind. Treat others as you would like to be treated. Failure to do this will bring unhappiness and misery to you and your fellow citizens. 2. Do not get discouraged. Remember, nothing lasts forever. Someday, this will be a distant memory. 3. Please leave towels on the floor if you wish them to be cleaned. Hang up those you wish to use again. 4. Books not in your possession will be returned to their original place on the stacks every night. A book will be considered in your possession if you are touching it. 5. If you are killed, you will be restored to life on the following day. Please try to avoid death as much as possible. 6. All contracts, bonds, commitments, covenants, pledges, entered into prior to your entering hell are null and void. This includes, but is not limited to, debt, marriage, natural births and adoptions, requirements of citizenship, military obligations, student loans, etc. 7. Remember, you are never really alone, although it may feel like it for very long stretches of time. 8. Please don't write on, mark, or mar library materials. Although repairs are made nightly, we would like to keep repairs to a minimum. 9. Lastly, you are here to learn something. Don't try to figure out what it is. This can be frustrating and unproductive. We hope you enjoy your stay here. We have done all we can to make your stay a pleasant and instructive one. I stared at the rules a long time, especially number 6. As a Mormon, I had always believed that I was married for eternity. But now my wife was gone? Was she here somewhere? Were my children missing me? Was everyone here who had ever lived? No. I remember the demon tapping away on his handheld device, seemingly to send people to a variety of hells. Still, all I had believed in during my life appeared to be mistaken. Gone, just like that. All my hopes, all my prayers. It was all wrong. I remembered what little I had read about Zoroastrianism. Iranian, started in approximately 600 BC. I found I could recall every detail of my life. Every event ever experienced, I could remember with perfect clarity. I could remember every word on every page I'd ever read, every conversation, every tax form I'd ever filled out. I could reconstruct every second of every day I'd been alive, from the moment of my birth until the day I finally shut my eyes at the end. This clarity of memory surprised me the first time I tried reviewing the past, but it was all there. This was to be the greatest curse of hell. Sometimes I would replay my entire life again and again for thousands of years, remembering all the things I could have done differently. All the things. No, I won't go there now. I must tell this story. The first few days were ones of discovery. Everyone just sort of nodded to one another. I think we were all disoriented and confused. It was not until about 2 p.m. on the second day that I noticed I felt hungry. I had seen someone using the food kiosk earlier. The man had just walked up and said, "Roast beef sandwich," and one had appeared on the tray before him. I decided to be more specific. A roast beef sandwich with provolone cheese, Dijon mustard, lettuce, tomato, and mayonnaise on rye bread. Much to my surprise, exactly what I had asked for appeared. Could I get a Diet Coke too? It appeared likewise, and looked and tasted like a Diet Coke. And how about a vanilla shake? As an afterthought, I added, like the kind at the Purple Aardvark on 2nd South in Mountain Grove, Utah. It came, just like I remembered it. The taste, texture, and presentation, including being served upside down in a bowl. It was all the same. There were no tables, so I sat on the floor under the railing, dangling my feet over the edge, and staring at the rows and rows of floors on the other side of the abyss. Across the chasm, people were also reading the rules, wandering around, and, just as we were, starting small conversations. Some were using the kiosk and eating. Mind if I join you? The speaker was a young man. But then, so was I. That thought cheered me. He was wearing the same cotton robe we all wore, thick with wide sleeves that fell to about the forearm, with a hole cut out at the top wide enough to expose the bottom of our necks. It hung loosely and modestly to about mid-calf. Our feet were bare. The temperature seemed pleasant, not too cold or too hot. I motioned to the floor, and he plopped down beside me. We dangled our legs over the edge, our arms resting on the railing. He was eating an apple and had a can of V8 juice. "Strange hell," he said, motioning to the people on the other side of the chasm. "Not what I had expected." "Not what I expected," I agreed. "Not Zoroastrian either, then?" "Mormon." "Ah, I was agnostic. So of course, I wasn't thinking of this as the final ending," he said, waving his arms around randomly. You from Utah? Yeah, you? I'm from Santa Rosa, California. Never been there. We sat silently for a few minutes, eating our lunches thoughtfully. I think at the time we were still taking it all in. He drained his can and tossed it down into the bottomless space, separating us from the floors on the other side. We both watched it fall until it grew so small it disappeared. We both held our breath, waiting for some sound of it hitting the bottom. It never came. Deep hole, he said conversationally. I wonder how far down to the bottom, I said, inclining my head downward. He shrugged, shaking his. I can't imagine. What did you think of the rules? He asked, taking another bite of his apple. Not very informative. Seemed simple enough. I wonder what happens if you don't follow them. I mean, it says if we aren't kind to each other, we'll have a miserable time of it. Is that because we're punished in some way? The man looked at me for a minute, somewhat frightened. He finally asked if I'd seen the lake of fire and brimstone. I told him what our demon had said, about them all being actors. What a strange place. Well, I can tell you one thing. I'm getting out of here as soon as possible. I'm gonna find my book and get it in that slot in 2 shakes of a lamb's tail, he said determinedly. I'm not gonna stay in this place for 20 years before starting, and then spend another 20 looking for it. I nodded, and said I would be doing the same. Spending 20 years looking for a book did not sound pleasant. What if it stretched to 50 or even 100 years? I wondered. Looking around at the size of this library, it would not seem hard to imagine that there were a million books lining the shelves that stretched up, down, and side to side as far as the eye could see. We talked most of the afternoon. I told him about my death. He told me about his. He died of a heart attack at age 93 in his sleep. It sounded like a pleasant way to die. Of course, I was a little surprised to find myself sitting in a room with a demon and watching a scene from Dante's Inferno. I'm still a little surprised to find myself here, but it's all so real. There's a sense of actuality that I just can't dismiss. I'm fairly pleased to find myself so young and strong again. If only Sally could see me now. Wouldn't she get a kick out of this? My, what a strange universe we live in. About this time, we noticed a young lady standing by the kiosk next to us, who seemed to be waiting for a chance to ask us something. Hello, my companion said simply. She looked sad and lost, and seemed near enough to tears not to be able to hold them back much longer. Are we in hell? She shuddered. We both stood up awkwardly. I looked at my companion, and he looked at me. He spoke first. We think so. With that, she let go, and sobbed bitterly into her hands. I looked at my companion, and tears were running down his face. It took me a minute to realize I was crying too. She looked up, and soon, we found ourselves in a group hug, bawling furiously. We looked at one another, all strangers, all lost and alone, and the absurdity of our situation struck us. We all suddenly burst into an awkward laughter that just as quickly melted into sobs again. It took some time, but we eventually gathered a measure of composure. I ran into a nearby bathroom and grabbed some toilet paper and passed it around to our small troop. We introduced ourselves. I learned my companion's name was Elliot Collington. The woman was named Larissa Sims. She had died of breast cancer at age 44. It seemed odd, standing there in hell, but understanding how we each had died seemed the most important thing about us. I see now, however, that it was only because it was the freshest thing on our minds, and something we had worried about all our lives in one way or another. Now, it was over. We were dead, and now we were in hell. We 3 talked until the lights went out again. The only light visible was a faint greenish glow coming out of the room with the beds. The source of the light turned out to be a dimly lit exit sign facing into the room. Inside, the room was dark, but each of us felt or maneuvered our way to one of the beds. Last time I looked at the clock, it was about 9:45, so I supposed it was about 10 o'clock when the lights went out. I lay there a while, but could not sleep. How strange it all was. I decided to try to see if I could get a glass of warm milk to help me sleep. I felt my way to the kiosk and said, "Warm milk, please," but nothing happened. I tried a couple of times, but apparently, the machines only worked when the lights were on. As I made my way back to the bed, Larissa asked if I had tried the kiosk just now. I replied in the affirmative, explaining my failure to get some milk, and then climbed into bed. Rather than the breathing of my companions, I was stunned by the stillness. I'd spent the last month in a hospital, and was used to commotion, ticks, hums, beeps, and the hush swish of air conditioning systems going on and off, nurses coming in and out at all times of the night. Here in hell, it was absolutely still, not even the whisper of any movement. The stillness of the grave? I shuddered and curled up into my blanket. The mattress was firm and comfortable, and I soon drifted into a deep, dreamless sleep. I awoke when the light came on. Elliot was first to the bathroom, and I could hear the shower running. Larissa was still asleep. I drank from the drinking fountain and walked outside and asked for a glass of cold orange juice. I leaned over the railing and drank my juice, looking deep into the crevice between the floors, bracketing our side and the other opposite. I don't think I'd ever seen anything so deep. Not even the Grand Canyon had seemed so vast. After a few minutes, Larissa joined me in staring over the side. "I used to be afraid of heights, but this looks even beyond my fear. It looks like it goes on forever," she remarked. "Maybe it does." I was wrong, of course. It does end. There is a bottom. But forever would have been a better word. Forever and ever would hardly have described it. Infinity is even too small a word to describe the vastness of the distance to the bottom. But I've stood upon the bottom floor. The human mind cannot comprehend what it took to reach, but I've been there. For the first time since our arrival, Larissa and I walked over to the shelves of books and pulled one down. Each volume appeared to be identical on the outside. They were bound in light brown, high-quality calfskin. The edges were gilded in bright gold, and the paper was a thick, heavy bond, substantial and bright white, fibrous, and nicely stretched into the binding. Each page was a solid block of text, an ordinary book by all appearances, except the text was complete gibberish. A random splash of capital and lowercase characters, punctuation marks, and other characters like ampersand, asterisk, money sign, and pound. Here's a line from the first page of the first book I picked up. Every page had a similar look. "These books are nothing but garbage," Larissa said in a disgusted voice. "When I was looking at these, I was thinking about a lifetime spent reading great works of literature. Now I get it. This is hell. An eternity surrounded by books, but they're all nonsense." She gave a sarcastic laugh and heaved the book over the railing. A man wandered over to us. "I see you've discovered the quality of our library." "I can't believe it," I said, picking up another volume and staring at the textual salad of symbols. "My name is Bob, but my friends call me Biscuit." "How do you do, Biscuit?" I continued to pull books off the shelf and flipping through them. I was having a hard time believing all of the books were just collections of random characters. The man calling himself Biscuit seemed mildly amused. I was pulling them off the shelf, paging rapidly through them, and then, like Clarissa, tossed them over the side. More people joined us, and soon a fair number of us were looking through the books and tossing them over the side, most of them making the same sorts of comments. "I can't believe it. Such nice books, and every one of them filled with nonsense. This isn't right, is it? This is hell. This really is hell." One of the women was laughing hysterically and just tossing books over the side. She wasn't even looking at them. I have to admit, I found a certain strange pleasure in heaving books over the side. It was a feeling akin to popping bubble wrap. Taking a book of nonsense, tossing it over the rail, and watching it until it disappeared flapping wildly into the oblivion below gave me a strange satisfaction, a small sense of purpose. Only Biscuit refrained from helping the general effort to clean the shelves. He just sat there smiling, shaking his head. I see, he said to no one in particular. We really are in the Library of Babel. A woman standing next to me, watching our books fall like a pair of wounded ducks spiraling to the ground, inquired politely, The Library of Babel? This is the Library of Babel, he shouted. We're in it. Not like Borges described it, but this is it. The same idea. Several people turned their attention to Biscuit, including me. What's the Library of Babel? Another man asked, repeating the woman's question. Don't you see? Biscuit was fairly animated, and most of the people who had been launching books into the chasm had turned to listen to him. It's written on the sign with the rules outside the rest areas. It says this hell is based on a story by Borges. I remember the story. Look, the books all end on page 410, just like the books in his story. And look at this. They're all in blocks of... Here he started counting. Yes, 40 lines. And I'll bet there are... He started counting again. Yes, 80 characters per line, just as Borges described. Amazing. We're in the Library of Babel. Someone asked a third time, a little more impatiently than the first two inquiries. What's the Library of Babel? Biscuit looked around him and saw that an audience of about 50 people now gave him its undivided attention. Well, he began in a lecturesome tone, imagine a library that contains not just every book that has been written, but every book that could be written. I remember the story exactly. How strange. But the basic idea from Borges' story is that the library contains every possible book. So somewhere in here is a book of all A's, a book of all periods, or a book of all semicolons, or B's. Any letter. There's a book that alternates A's and B's for its entire length, but most books are just a random collection of symbols. So there's a book of half A's, and in the second half all B's, proposed one woman. Yes, but more than that. Every book ever written is in there, and every book ever written is there backwards. One man raised his hand like a student in a classroom, and Biscuit acknowledged him. It can't have every book, the man said, tilting his head as he affected a knowing and wise demeanor. Some books are longer than 400 pages. Take War and Peace, for example. He looked around, nodding his head, trying to find someone to acknowledge his point. No, don't you see? Biscuit said. War and Peace would be in multiple volumes, with blank pages after it ended, completing the last volume, added a woman standing next to me. Or with the story of Leo Tolstoy at the end, added another woman. Both, said Biscuit. There's even one with the history of Leo Tolstoy's nose hair completing the volume. But most are going to be pure and utter nonsense, random characters with no order, mostly nonsense. So there's a version of War and Peace with the main character named Fred instead of Pierce, said a man to no one in particular. And another where Mark Twain and Huck Finn joined the war against Napoleon, added another woman. But mostly nonsense, Biscuit added again softly. Everyone was silent a moment. That's what the sign out front means. The speaker was my new friend, Elliot. We have to find our own life story to get out of here. In 1 or 2 volumes? Asked a man in despair. Or 10 or 12, Biscuit continued, almost to himself. There's a second-by-second account of our lives, probably in multiple volumes. A minute-by-minute account, an hour-by-hour, a day-by-day. There's one that covers the events of our lives, as viewed by our mothers, one by our fathers, and one by our neighbors, one by our dogs. There must be thousands of biographies here. Which one do they want, I wonder? Everyone seemed stunned, thinking about the different volumes in the library. You mean there's a biography of everything and everyone in this library? There's even a biography of the guppies in my fish tank? Yes. Anything that can be written is there. The history of your big toe, as viewed from the perspective of your shoe, is there. Anything you can imagine. Biscuit seemed to be astonishing even himself. It must have billions and billions of books, one woman said. If there's a biography for anyone who's ever lived, every guppy that ever lived, and every worm that ever lived, there must be billions and billions of books. Wouldn't it be infinite? Said another man shakily. I'm not sure. I don't think so, Biscuit said slowly. If we have 410 pages, 40 lines of 80 characters, and a finite number of characters, there's a finite number of books, I would think. But it's large. Very large. We were all silent at the thought of the task before us. In this library of mostly meaningless books, there was a book that described our life story. We had to find that one book. It could take millions of years, I thought. Millions of years. Ha! Most of the people had lost interest in opening the books, and had begun conversations in small groups. I fell in with Biscuit and a woman named Dolores. Biscuit had lived most of his life as a homeless schizophrenic. He had earned the name Biscuit when he refused to give up 2 dinner rolls to a couple of policemen arresting him. He told them, "These are the brain and heart of the world. Were I to give them up, the world would die and waste away." He spent his life believing the world was dying, because one of his cellmates had eaten them while he was asleep. Dolores had been a housewife, married to a factory worker in Detroit. She raised 4 children, and then opened a ceramic shop after they had grown and left home. Her life had been rich and happy. She died at her daughter's house, surrounded by those she loved. In both stories of my companions, their young looks contrasted with their sagacity and age. I had died young, and never really felt I had matured. I remember my own father, a real man of the house, someone who knew what it was to be a man. He radiated confidence. I never felt like that. I felt as if I were an imposter the entire time I was raising my kids. I felt lost and helpless. I was flying by the seat of my pants, always with a feeling I was not doing the right things. Compared to my own father, I seemed completely clueless. My dad was still living when I died. I hope he ends up in a nice hell. A nice hell. I laughed at the thought. This wasn't a bad place. It seemed like a tedious hell, but there was plenty to eat, good company, and it sounded like after a while we would eventually get out. We 3 went off to a nearby kiosk. I found Elliot and Larissa there, and introduced everyone. "I guess we've got our work cut out for us," Elliot observed positively. "It's too bad we're starting our search in the middle. Maybe we should find where the library ends. You know, start at the beginning." "It's not a bad idea," Biscuit said. "At least we wouldn't accidentally redo a floor or something." Larissa smiled. "I'm still not convinced there's not an infinity of books. How can there be a limit to the number of books that can be written?" Dolores and Elliot nodded in agreement. I'll have to admit, I was a little skeptical myself, but as you'll see, I eventually met someone who had calculated the number of books in the library. There is a finite number. The clock was moving toward 10 p.m., and I thought the lights would probably go out soon. I went over and ordered a warm milk, and it appeared piping hot, the way I like it. I chose the same bedroom and the same bed as I had slept in the night before. My 2 friends did the same. No one else came in with us, and we had the room to ourselves. What creatures of habit we are. After only a few nights in hell, we had settled into a comfortable routine. As I drank my milk, the lights went out, and the utter stillness returned. My thoughts were restless now, and I was in no mood for sleep. How far was it to the end of the hallway in which we lived? Was it further than a mile? What if it were 100 miles? How many books would that be? What if it were 1,000? It wasn't that far. Surely.